Whether you believe so or not, there are actually many different factors that affect us in the present from American history. My name is Tyler, and here are the top 15 similarities from American history that relate to the present. Number 15. The constant evolution of industry. When industrialization first came into play for the United States, it introduced something that forevermore would increase the production of factories. After Henry Ford popularized the assembly line in the United States, many other factories were getting in on the action. When B-25 bombers were mass-produced using the assembly line in World War II, they were built at 1 per hour. That's 168 per week. But it doesn't stop there. When the Model T Ford was first manufactured, it took 12 hours. Then the assembly line came into play, and now it only took 2 hours and 30 minutes. Now in the present, we have definitely evolved the technology of manufacturing in the assembly line. Using robotics and also some help from other hands, we can make 350 iPhones a minute in one factory. And speaking of cars again, a Ford Focus is completed every 86 seconds. That's about 2 minutes. Now that's what I call efficiency. Number 14. Tensions between the North and the South. Let's be honest, everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say the North and the South don't typically like each other. At least, that's what many people think. But in several different time periods, generalizations, just like the ones that are made today, were made for each other by the opposing side, and insults just went back and forth. It's been shown throughout American history, such as the Civil War, where the North and the South had a huge disagreement, and it even carried out into a war. But not only there, the Roaring Twenties is a prime example. Foreigners characterized as traditionalists and the city population as modernists, disagreeing heavily on women's rights and several different other aspects. That's just one of the many examples in American history. And trust me, another thing that you are obviously familiar with, unless you've been living under a rock, is that the North is generalized as Democratic and the South is Republican. And to be quite frank, no one listens to each other anymore. Isn't it supposed to be the United States? Number 13. Racism. Let's be honest, if you didn't see this one coming, you probably don't even know what the video is about. Racism, unfortunately, is a prominent factor throughout American life. Now, your standpoint on what this is truly is none of my business. After all, it's a free country, and you're allowed to think whatever you think. But there's no doubt that it's there. Throughout what seems to be the entirety of just about all recent major history itself, racism has thrived in all kinds of different eras, such as the Industrial Era, the Civil War era, before that, after that, the modern era, pretty much everything. Racism was not uncommon in the North beforehand of the Civil War, when rights were starting to come back. And slavery still did happen. And, of course, going a little bit more recent, just 100 years ago, we had World War I and World War II. African Americans really did not have a chance to play big roles in the war. Sometimes they would just do serving jobs on ships, or even janitorial positions, and to be honest, they couldn't really fight for their country, like they possibly wanted to. After all, at the time, it truly was the place to be if you wanted to be a free citizen. While the small amount that did get to fight in the war served their countries well, they weren't really recognized as well as white soldiers were. Some modern medals at the time weren't even given to them until after their death. But it doesn't end there. Today, racism, while luckily not as big as a problem, is still a significant issue. I've seen many different instances on the news and being stereotyped again and again, and regardless of your opinion, is police brutality. And it's not like all cops do that. I mean, it's just some of them. But you could just really see that racism is still prominent. This could even happen to just regular African Americans who are just living their lives. Many black people live in fear because of how discriminated they still are. And I could go on and on about this, but we really need to get to the next one. Number 12, immigration. Alright, let me break it down for you guys. Immigration was also existed in the past, and newsflash, also very difficult to get in the country. Some travel bans that were put into play by that time kind of seem like the ones today, such as the Asian ban. We didn't allow Asians to come into the country for a certain time period to lower the amount of immigrants that came to America. This is kind of like the Muslim travel ban that we have today. And another example is Ellis Island, of course. Now, Ellis Island was incredibly cruel when it came to accepting immigrants. They would check for disabilities, both physical and mental, and different weaknesses that would make it difficult for people to work. If you weren't in working condition, you were sent back. And even sometimes, you were sent back for no reason. And the fact that you were kept to wait for so long, a lot of times, was just excruciating, and some people just went home. Nowadays, it's extremely difficult when it comes to immigration. And to be honest, the Muslim travel ban and the sheer fact with Mexicans having a hard time getting into the country, and even some other countries and other people from different countries and different ethnicities having trouble coming into the country, that really does seem similar to what history we have today.
Coincidence? I think not!
Number 11. Yellow journalism. This one's pretty obvious, so I'll be quick. Yellow journalism is basically the fake news of the past. It started around the 1900s, and they would use capital letters and stuff to really lure people into viewing it. It's kind of like clickbait on YouTube. By the way, destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy? Yeah. Number 10. Involvement in foreign affairs. Okay, so this one's pretty straightforward. It's kind of like yellow journalism, except it needs a lot more explanation than yellow journalism. This one's going to take a little bit longer. So basically, in World War I, before the United States involvement, we got a telegram that was intercepted from Germany called the Zimmermann telegram. Now, if you are in my history class and you don't know what this is, I feel really bad for you that you haven't paid attention. However, in the event that you are watching this and you are not in my history class and you still haven't learned this, well, the Zimmermann telegram was actually a telegram sent by Germany to Mexico that would suggest that Japan and Mexico go against the United States in the event that the United States goes hostile against Germany. Now, of course, being outraged, the president decided that this was not good, and then he declared war. That's one example of foreign involvement. Now, another example of foreign involvement, of course, is World War II. However, that was definitely necessary, as Japan did attack first, and we just needed to take the right measures. Now, how does this apply today? Well, there are actually a lot more recent wars that deal with this and how we are involved with different foreign countries. So, things like North Korea, as being the most recent, we are pretty involved in their nuclear program. And other things like Iran, where we went in there and tried to take their weapons of mass destruction, which in the end we found out that they didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, but we did find oil, which I will cover later in the video. We have went into a lot of different foreign situations, and it just really goes to show that I don't think that's going to let up anytime soon. Number 9. Attacks against the United States. When I say attacks against America, I mean things like Pearl Harbor. Now, before the United States went into war with the Germans and with Japan, there was Pearl Harbor. The Pearl Harbor attack got 2,300 military personnel killed. That's a lot of people. And to think that it's on that one island, I think that's a pretty large scale. Now, how does this tie in with modern history? Well, think about it. This is not the only time that a surprise attack has happened in the United States or in the United States territory. Now, a prime example, of course, is 9/11. Now, 9/11 had 3,000 people killed on that day. And yes, while there were different locations and you need to account for all the different places and different planes, well, that's still a lot of people. And Unfortunately, it did happen. The terrorist group Al Qaeda decided that they wanted to do this. We have been attacked, surprised before, and most of the time, we go over there and we bring our own justice. Number 8, financial support. Alright, so the Great Depression was pretty much a prime example of some of the first financial relief centers to start showing up. Now, for people who didn't have jobs, they would go to these recovery centers and they would get money, and it wouldn't be a large amount, but they would get money to at least buy a little bit, or at least enough food for the family. And of course, sometimes it wasn't enough, and the father or the mother, or even sometimes both, would just give the food to their children. However, this really does relate to today because there are programs like welfare and all sorts of other different things that just really symbolize just the evolution of how we've helped people with their financial issues. Number 7, global organizations. Alright, so basically what I mean by global organizations is things like the League of Nations. Now, eventually, after it was made, pretty much after World War I, after it was created, when, the United States founded it, they backed out, and then there was no United States in the League of Nations, which was kind of a thing that would stop big wars like World War I. Eventually, when Germany rose to power, the League of Nations really couldn't do anything about it. Now, what we have today that was made after World War II is the United Nations, which the United States did not back out of this time. It's basically the collection of the large nations, the small nations, pretty much an alliance. And to be honest, it kind of feels like the same thing. The United States just feels like that piece in the puzzle that should have been there all along. America. Number 6, marijuana and prohibition. When I say marijuana and prohibition, I'm talking about weed. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, and everyone has their own opinion. So shut up and listen so I can teach you the facts. In 1920, prohibition started that basically outlawed the production and consumption of alcohol. And it really didn't work because of all the different people who would just export it from different places. A good example of this is the mafia, who actually got their alcohol mostly from Canada and brought it into the United States. Now, the Prohibition Bureau was the main set of people who would have to enforce the law because either some states just wouldn't enforce it themselves, or the mafia would just bribe the cops so that they wouldn't do anything about it. Now, there are these places called speakeasies in cities that you would have to, know your secret codes and stuff to get in, but there'd be alcohol there that people could drink. And not to mention, crime rates increased like crazy as soon as Prohibition started. It really didn't work. So that's why in 1930, on December 5th, it was repealed. Now, how does this really relate to marijuana? Now, if you really do think about it, marijuana, it's been outlawed, and there's just a lot of different crime that goes on with it now. I mean, there's drug dealers, even some kids just do that stuff. And whether you think so or not, maybe we should legalize it. I mean, there are plenty of different states that have, decided to legalize it, and there aren't any recorded deaths that pertain to marijuana. Now, the risks of lung cancer and premature brain development are there definitely, as smoking does affect, but it just really doesn't make any sense because, like alcohol, in controlled amounts, it's safe to use. Now, will they bring it back entirely? I don't know. And like Prohibition, not all states enforce it. And one example who doesn't enforce it, the federal government. This means that the states have complete leverage on whatever they want and how they want to enforce it. Now, the federal government at any time can step in and decide to enforce it, but that's something that we'll just have to wait and see if it will happen. Number 5, attacks on politicians. Alright, so what these are basically A good example is the 1919 anarchist bombings that sent 36 bombs out, and about 24 of them were not discovered by the police, but they were sent to politicians and appointees, including the Attorney General of the United States, which he is pretty important. But eventually, it did kill quite a few people and injured several people. But I guess the whole reason for this was because, just a lot of backlash for things like anarchism, communism, socialism, and just labor unjustness. Eventually, this did stop. They found 12 bombs, but this relates to today because the Austin, Texas bombing, that bombs were sent to houses and snuck through postage services and killed mostly African Americans. Now, you could see that the motive was probably that, to kill many African American people, but you could see that the similarity is that people who do not like other people, I guess, still violence is the answer for some. Number 4, military technology. Alright, so what this means is that military technology, like its basic premise, really hasn't changed. I don't mean that there were laser blasters in the Civil War, but things like B-17 bombers and Lockheed F-117 Nighthawks, they're both bombers. The premise hasn't really changed. We still had ways of bombing locations, whether it be artillery, planes, even freaking cannons. We haven't really changed our main goal. And our goal is usually the same on these different technologies. Number 3, effectiveness of military advancements. I bet you're going like, oh man, we just did something military. Well, I don't care. So sit back, shut up, and listen to what I have to say. So if you really think about it, military advancements involving technology really have the exact same benefits as they have today. If you think about it, there have been so many different things that humans have come up with in the United States. Things like ICBMs, stealth planes, even things that are in the past, like what I'm talking about. Airplanes, tanks, nuclear bombs, atomic bombs, just about anything you could really think of. Artillery, just so many different things. Now, what does this have to do with the present? So, a good example is the nuclear bomb dropped in Japan during World War II. Now, if it were not for that, and not saying that it was ethically sound, because if you ask me, that was kind of messed up. But if it were not for the 2 nuclear bombs dropped, Japan wouldn't have surrendered, and the United States would have to use more soldiers. Now, from an ethical standpoint, that's not right. But if you think about it from a strategic standpoint, that's definitely beneficial to the United States Army. Now, things today, things like drones that can fire missiles or just do spy things that would require humans otherwise if you didn't have the technology. We are still saving soldiers by coming up with new technologies. For God's sakes, the F-17 fighter jet has never lost a fight, and it has like 100-some victories. Now, if you ask me, I think that's pretty good. Number 2, controversial topics. Now, if you really think about it, controversial topics did and always will exist. It's just controversy in general. Someone is either offended or doesn't agree with you. Now, other people can agree with you, but a good example of a controversial topic in the past is the debate for evolution. Now, the debate for evolution was that after evidence for evolution existing was discovered, well, a lot of people didn't really want to handle the change, and many just stuck to religion. It was even illegal to teach kids evolution. Now, another controversial topic that could be related in terms of how controversial it is marijuana. Now, I already talked about marijuana, but if you think about it, it's just so similar in terms of the binary choices that you're given when formulating an opinion. Now, you either don't care or you say yes or no. For both, it really works like that. And I could name hundreds of different controversial topics, but that's just one of the few. Before we get to our number one pick, here are a few honorable mentions. Number one, imperialism. Yes, it's true. Even today, we still do imperialism. Under the leadership of President Theodore Roosevelt, the United States decided to follow imperialism by doing things like the Spanish American War, to follow the three G's of imperialism: gold, God, and glory. Gold stood for the natural resources that you could find during the war. God was the religion that you could spread to the people who inhabited the place, and glory was just the sheer land that you could take, but also the riches that you could receive. Now, we're going to be focusing on gold because that's really the one that we follow today. Now, if you think about it, the gold part of it is just the oil that we get from the Iraq War and the Middle East. There were no weapons of mass destruction, but while we were there, we decided that since we were already there, we might as well just take it. And we did. We took oil from the Middle East so that we could fund our military, just like military might is what Theodore Roosevelt promoted. Now, is this a good thing? I really can't answer that because many people have different opinions. Was it necessary? I wouldn't say so. However, that's the number one pick. Yeah, you can really see that all these similarities pertain to the United States, and there's so many different things that could be followed like this. Do you agree with my list? Tell me what you think. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time.